Jacqui Brauman is a lawyer who focuses on estate planning, and she is also the host of her own podcast called IQ Meets EQ. Jacqui Brauman, hello and welcome to Talking Trading.
Hello, Caroline. How are you?
Jacqui, I love the name of your podcast. As soon as I saw it, I thought, oh my God, I'd love to interview Jacqui.
I know, a lawyer with EQ, who would have thought?
Jacqui, just to get started, just tell us very briefly a little bit about yourself.
So I'm from country Victoria originally. So, born and bred, just country girl, and just very driven as well because, with low expectations from country girls in the 90s, I'm like, no, I'm going to prove you all wrong. And so I've just consistently gone out and done that, I think.
In what way? What have you done? Tell us your achievements.
Just constantly going and getting more and more educated. And then realizing that I had to work for myself as well. And so going into business and then having lots and lots of interests, I suppose, and activities on at any one time, as you say, podcast as well, and books and a business and all the other little bits that go along with it.
And you look really gorgeous. So I'm guessing you're kind of in your 30s.
I'm not quite 40 yet. Yep.
Jacqui, we are here today to talk about estate planning. Can you start by telling us what is estate planning and then why is it so important?
Estate planning is more than just a will. So a lot of people do think wills, but estate planning takes in a bigger picture. We look at superannuation, we look at legacy, we look at what happens if you lose capacity and you're still alive. We also look at digital assets these days as well. So fairly broad. And also if you've got young kids, making sure that they're going to be looked after by the right people in the right way is also really important. So those are some of the aspects that we have at the forefront of our mind when we're doing estate planning, and trying to make sure that your legacy also doesn't include some kind of dispute later on.
I'm sure you've been embroiled in quite a few of those. When you talk about technological aspects, were you referring to crypto there?
Look, it is included, but our digital estate is far more than that. So a lot of the companies we deal with online are not Australian companies. We have our Facebook accounts, we have our Google accounts, we use a Google Drive, we use Dropbox or some kind of cloud thing. We have so much IP and photos hovering around, stored digitally, let alone things like, well, now we're moving more to subscriptions with Netflix, but prior to subscriptions, we also bought digital rights on iTunes to music and books and all those sorts of things. So there's a lot of things that we're buying that's just in a digital format as well.
Estate planning 2021.
Very much so.
Part of estate planning, to me, feels like being a responsible adult. Why do a lot of people not focus on it and fail to do it properly or even at all?
I think, well, there's a lot of aspects. I think there is a bit of a head in the sand sometimes, particularly, in our 20s and 30s, we do think that we're invincible. And sometimes it takes someone our own age dying before we even think that death is possible. So that's first. Then there's actually a whole lot of people who are really superstitious about focusing on it, and then they think it will happen because they've focused on it, rather than just getting it done. And then others think it's far too big a job and they can't make the decisions. But that's what someone like me does, is guide you through the decision making. So you don't have to come to me with it all planned out. I ask you the questions and guide you through the process, and we get to a point where you're like, oh, that was easy.
And have you seen messes where there's been really nasty family disputes?
Yeah, lots. And I think that's why I prefer doing the front end estate planning and getting it right, because I don't think that it's fair to do a half-assed job at the front end and expect to then make money out of the divorce. I think that potentially there are a lot of law firms that have sort of worked on that model, unfortunately. So no, I'm prevention more than cure.
Wow, my God, I like you more and more. Okay, so in the very sticky situation that something goes really wrong once someone has died, and I have been privy to a situation like this, It's awful. And people go crazy around wills. What are the sort of things that can go wrong?
So not choosing the right executors, so the people who are actually in control of the process.
What does that mean? So how can you not choose the right executors?
So the people that you choose to look after the actual performance of the will and making sure it gets done has to be the right sort of people. So someone who you know is actually going to be able to take care of the administration and move things forward, and also be able to communicate with all the people involved. Because I think a lot of the disputes come down to two things. Either people are surprised by what's in the will because it actually hasn't been spoken about before, or the executor, for some reason in the family dynamics, there's some kind of control issue. And so it's the dynamic of the family that already exists that then plays out all over again.
Yes. Is that all? Does that sum it up in a nutshell?
Those are the main things. I mean, you've got all the other little factors, like someone's been estranged for a long time, or someone's got a greater financial need. But ultimately, it really does come back to family dynamics and who's still upset because someone got something for Christmas when they were 5 and the other person didn't. And it plays out throughout our lifetimes between siblings, particularly. I mean, some of the other problems are that parents think that their kids are always going to be friends and they force their kids to work together. But again, that's family dynamics. It's not really thinking through the bigger picture of the control issues and the personalities and the little things that people are holding on to for lifetimes.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? And they never go away. Look, so Jacqui, I am looking to develop an estate plan and I want to come to you. What are the main sort of things that need to be considered?
So what I would need initially is for you to have thought through the main people in your family tree and make sure you have their full names and contact details. And then have also thought through what is in your estate. So not only what you own, but how you own it. So what's owned jointly, what's potentially in a family trust or in superannuation. And also, you know, for people sort of younger, looking at what sort of debt there is and making sure that there is going to be assets that will cover the debt too. So those things are really what to think about before coming to do an estate plan. And, you know, most people who've got a fairly good handle on their finances and maybe have a financial planner as well in the background or something already know all this stuff. So it's not much more to then come along and go, okay, I need to look at my estate planning. Here's all my stuff. Where do I start? And then I guide you through getting the elements in the will that you need. So you don't actually have to have, done a whole lot of homework first. And it takes 2 appointments over about a month, and you're done.
Wow, I'm sure you make it sound easy, but it's not really. Let's look at some terms here. Power of attorney, medical power of attorney, end of life directives. What are these terms?
So a power of attorney, we usually think about what's called an enduring power of attorney. So it endures past someone losing capacity. So we appoint someone to manage our affairs if we're still alive, but can't do things for ourselves anymore. So that is an enduring power of attorney. It usually covers financial and legal affairs and sometimes some personal decisions as well. For your medical decisions, various states in Australia call it a different thing. In some states, it's called guardianship. In Victoria, they've changed the name again, and it's now a medical treatment decision maker. But basically, if you are alive, but in a state where a doctor can't get instructions from you about what treatment you want or need, there's someone that can make those decisions as well. So that's those first ones. Then a directive. So the directive sort of underlies the medical power of attorney, because you appoint someone to make your medical decisions, but do they actually know what your wishes are? And so the directive really gives some details, usually in a specific situation. Usually it's more of an end of life document, that, you know, if everyone has tried everything, but I'm still terminal, this is how I want to be treated. So if I can't make my decisions anymore, please follow this directive.
And if someone is sliding down cognitively, how is that determined? And at what stage are they not able to control their own will and power of attorney?
Huge question. And that, I think, has a lot of legal arguments that arise out of it as well. But most of the time, it's put down to the doctors to decide. Particularly for medical decisions, they tend to gauge whether they can get a direction or not as to medical treatment. But for the financial and legal affairs, cognitive decline is really tricky. And at what point do you lose capacity to do some things but not others? And so it really has to be the person you appoint as the power of attorney to work fairly closely with any medical people that are involved to have those discussions, and perhaps they step into more of a support role initially because, mum or dad can still be making a lot of those day-to-day decisions themselves, but maybe big picture decisions like, should I sell the house, maybe shouldn't be something that they do on their own. So, that works well if the family works well together, but obviously there's lots of circumstances where it doesn't.
Yeah, Jacqui, you make it sound so easy and so cool, calm and collected when you talk about it, but I know from experience that it's not often like that.
No.
Let's talk about prenuptial agreements. Let's say you've got a partnership. One person earns so much more money than the other. Is a prenup worth considering in 2021?
Yeah, it can be. A lot of family lawyers are scared of them in many ways because the courts have set quite a few of them aside. Because if circumstances change throughout the relationship, and the longer the relationship goes, the less likely they're going to hold up. And I mean, they're relevant if you separate while you're alive, but they're not so relevant from an estate planning perspective if you die together.
Can I just jump in there? Sorry. So a prenuptial agreement is less relevant the longer you stay together. I did not know this.
Yeah, because the longer the relationship is together, the more you weave your lives together, the more you accumulate during that relationship rather than before. It's harder and harder to set that clear boundary aside. And also the reliance on each other, like the interdependency, becomes greater and greater. And certainly if kids come into the picture, then everything sort of goes out the window.
I see a wedding ring on your finger.
No kids.
So let's talk about de facto relationships. What are the rules around a de facto? What is a de facto, firstly?
So firstly, de factos are pretty much got all the same rights as married couples these days, as well as same-sex couples, all the same. A de facto relationship kicks in when a certain number of factors are sort of in play. As soon as a child is involved, the relationship is de facto. From an estate planning perspective, it's usually that they have to have been together for 2 years if there hasn't been a child. And so, and then the level
or been together.
Good question. Because then it does come down to how interdependent were they? Were they mixing funds? Were they paying for joint things together? Were they contributing to a household together? How emotionally dependent on each other were they? Or are they essentially separate people who are just friends and having some, fun together occasionally? So yeah, that is a fine line as well, and quite often argued over if a de facto is left out of a will, and the family thinks they're not a de facto, but the de facto certainly thinks they're a de facto.
Yeah. Oh gee, it's just fraught, isn't it?
Can be.
So what about blended families? What complications do we come across? Blended families. What is a blended family?
So a blended family is usually where there has been children from a prior relationship and a couple comes together.
So you're talking about stepchildren.
Yeah. And so you've got all sorts of different obligations to different people that start playing out. Your main obligation first is to your spouse. But if you've got children from your previous relationship too, then you've got competing obligations, and you have to work out how those fit in, whether you or depending on how old the kids are as well, you know, whether you talk to the kids and say, look, my first obligation is to my spouse, this is how it's going to work. Or whether you have some kind of discussion with your spouse and say, well, I want to make sure my kids get something. How do we work this through with our estate plan? And there are interesting ways of doing it. Superannuation is a good way potentially of doing it, because it's often a non-estate asset that can be directed where you want it to go. Same thing with life insurance policies and other financial products. So then you start getting quite technical.
It really comes across that you enjoy this. Do you enjoy this?
You know what? It's really, I really do like strategy, and that's ultimately what it is. But it's strategy with such a personal element because, like I said, the family dynamics really is the key as well.
And have you seen sticky, nasty situations in the worst of human nature?
Unfortunately, yeah. And you know what? The lawyers don't necessarily help it either. And yeah, so that's always a bit of a battle internally for me. Like, do I want to take on that sort of fight because of the impact that it has on me and because I can't do really good work? Or starting to move across into a fairly new space in Australia, collaborative practice for wills and estates. And so it's where specially trained professionals work as a team to take a family through a process, and they all sign an agreement that they will not go to court. And so they're actually got to solve the problem.
Wow. So what's your key message here today, Jacqui?
Look, I think that, as you say, I hope that I do make it sound easy, even though there's a lot of intricacies. It's just a matter of please spend some little bit of time on it and get it done. Because done the right way can just save so much heartache later. And that's the main message.
Done the right way can save so much heartache later. I love it. I love it. Any bits of advice for listeners?
Look, I think doing research is a good place to start. But again, it's sort of like passive action, isn't it? Because you feel really good that you're educating yourself and you're starting to think about it a lot. But again, it's just do it.
Where do people research?
Well, for starters, I have a lot of free information out there, a lot of free webinars people can jump on. They're usually 20 minutes, 30 minutes. In each state, there is a Office of a Public Advocate. So they have a lot of free information for particularly powers of attorney. As well, each state has a state trustee. They have a whole lot of free information as well for powers of attorney and for wills. And so those government places, the information you're getting from it's pretty reputable if you want to go somewhere that there's no agenda attached, if you're worried about you know, private firms giving information. But also shop around for opinion. You know, my way of doing things might not resonate with people, and so please, just like with any professional, you know, you don't have to go with the first one that you get advice from. Actually shop around till you find someone that you know you can work with.
Well, if people have resonated with you, where do they go to find you?
So my firm and the main place to go would be tbalaw.com.au, and I'll open it up and give my personal email address, Jacqui, JACQUI @tbalaw.com.au.
Thank you, Jacqui. And tell us about IQ Meets EQ.
Yeah, it's a fun little project that I have a podcast with a co-host. Originally, it was sort of like I was IQ being the practicing lawyer, and my co-host Ush is a non-practicing lawyer and she was EQ, except it's become more and more of a journey of how much EQ actually plays into success and to leadership and to all those other factors as you grow through your career. So there's a lot of interesting people that we've interviewed, and I think that that's what keeps me going, is the conversations that we have.
It's the conversations, it's the stories. Jacqui, thanks so much for your time today. That was very elucidating about estate planning.
Thank you. Happy to be here.